Hi, Grandma here, and I'm going to read from Number the Stars, and I'm going to read chapters 10 through 11. Well, we stopped in chapter 9 when we found out that there was a coffin brought into the house that's supposed to have Great Aunt Berta in it, but we know that Great Aunt Berta is not in the coffin. We don't know who or what is in the coffin. We also have people who have gathered that Anna Marie does not know, but then suddenly the Rosens came, Ellen's parents. So we have a couple with a new baby, we have an older man, and we have the Rosens sitting in Uncle Henrik's living room. So we begin chapter 10, Let Us Open the Casket. So what do you think is in the coffin or the casket? Well, I originally thought that maybe it was a person. Not anyone dead, but maybe somebody alive. What do you think? Well, let's read. You are all here now, Uncle Henrik said, looking around the living room. I must go. Anna Marie stood in the wide doorway looking in from the hall. The baby slept now and its mother looked tired. Her husband sat beside her, his arm across her shoulders. The old man's head was still bent. Peter sat alone, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. It was clear he was in deep thought. On the sofa, Ellen sat between her parents, one hand clasped tightly in her mother's. She looked up at Anna Marie but didn't smile. Anna Marie felt a surge of sadness. The bond of their friendship had not broken, but it was as if Ellen had moved now into a different world, the world of her own family, and whatever lay ahead for them. The elderly, bearded man looked up suddenly as Uncle Henrik prepared to go. God keep you safe, he said in a firm but quiet voice. Henrik nodded. God keep us all safe, he replied. Then he turned and left the room. A moment later, Anna Marie heard him leave the house. Mama brought the teapot from the kitchen and a tray of cups. Anna Marie helped to pass the cups around. No one spoke. Anna Marie, Mama whispered to her in the hall, you may go to bed if you want to. It is very late. Anna Marie shook her head, but she was tired. She could see that Ellen was too. Her friend's head was leaning on her mother's shoulder, and her eyes closed now and then. Finally, Anna Marie went to the empty rocking chair in the corner of the living room and curled there with her head against its soft padded back. She dozed. She was startled from her half-sleep by the sudden sweep of headlights through the sheer curtains and across the room as a car pulled up outside. The car door slammed. Everyone in the room tensed, but no one spoke. Who do you think it is? Well, the idea of the headlights sweeping makes me think that it's the police or somebody like the police. She heard, as if in a recurring nightmare, the pounding on the door, then the heavy, frightening, familiar staccato of boots on the kitchen floor. The woman with the baby gasped and began suddenly to weep. The male, accented voice from the kitchen was loud. We have observed, he said, that an unusual number of people have gathered at this house tonight. What's the explanation? There has been a death, Mama's voice replied calmly. It is always our custom to gather and pay our respects when a family member dies. I'm sure you are familiar with our customs. One of the officers pushed Mama ahead of him from the kitchen and entered the living room. There were others behind him. They filled the wide doorway. As always, their boots gleamed, their guns, their helmets, all of them gleamed in the candlelight. Anna Marie watched as the man's eyes moved around the room. He looked for a long time at the casket. Then he moved his gaze, focusing on each person in turn. When his eyes reached her, she looked back at him steadily. "Who died?" he asked harshly. No one answered. They watched Anna Marie, and she realized that the officer was directing the question at her. Now she knew for certain what Uncle Henrik had meant when he had talked to her in the barn. To be brave came more easily if you knew nothing. She swallowed. "My great-aunt Berta," she lied in a firm voice. The officer moved forward suddenly across the room to the casket. He placed one gloved hand on its lid. "Poor great-aunt Berta," he said in a condescending voice. "I do know your customs," he said, turning his gaze toward Mama, who stood in the doorway, "and I know it is the custom to pay one's respects by looking your loved one in the face. It seems odd to me that you have closed this coffin up so tightly." His hand was in a fist, and he rubbed it across the edge of the polished lid. "Why is it not open?" he demanded. "Let us open it up and take one last look at Great-Aunt Berta." Anna Marie saw Peter across the room stiffen in his chair, lift his chin, and reach slowly with one hand toward his side. What do you think he's reaching for? Mama walked quickly across the room, directly to the casket, directly to the officer. "You're right," she said. "The doctor said it should be closed because Aunt Berta died of typhus. And he said there was a chance the germs would still be there, that it would still be dangerous. But what does he know? Only a country doctor and an old man at that. And dear Aunt Berta, I've been longing to see her voice, to kiss her goodbye. Of course we will open the casket. I'm so glad you suggested." With a swift motion, the Nazi officer slapped Mama across her face. She staggered backward, and a white mark on her face darkened. "You foolish woman," he spat, "to think that we have any interest in seeing the body of your diseased aunt. Open it after we leave," he said. With one gloved thumb, he pressed a candle flame into darkness. The hot wax spattered on the table. "Put all these candles out, or pull the curtains." Then he strode to the doorway and left the room. Motionless, silent, one hand to her cheek, Mama listened. They all listened as the uniformed men left the house. Did they ever say who the uniformed men were? They were Nazi soldiers. "Mama!" Anna Marie cried. Her mother shook her head quickly and glanced at the open window, covered only by the sheer curtain. Anna Marie understood. There might still be soldiers outside, watching, listening. Peter stood and drew the dark curtains across the windows. He relit the extinguished candle. Then he reached for the old Bible that had always been there on the mantel. He opened it quickly and said, "I will read a psalm." His eyes turned to the page he had opened at random, and he began to read in a strong voice. "Oh, praise the Lord! How good it is to sing psalms to our God! How pleasant to praise him! The Lord is rebuilding Jerusalem. He gathers in the scattered sons of Israel. It is he who heals the broken in spirit and binds up their wounds. He who numbers the stars one by one." Well, that's a pretty important psalm, since that's the name of the book, Number the Stars. When you run across something like that when you're reading, it's a good idea to go back and reread it again to make sure you understand what the author is saying. So I'm going to reread part of that psalm again. "The Lord is rebuilding Jerusalem. He gathers in the scattered sons of Israel." Could that mean the Jews? It is he who heals the broken in spirit. Do you think there are people in that living room that are broken in spirit? And he binds up their wounds. And we know there are some that have been wounded. Mama's been hit by one of the soldiers. He who numbers the stars one by one. Who is the he that Psalms is talking about? I'm sure you probably have guessed that it's God. God who numbers the stars one by one. What does that mean? I think it means that if God has numbered the stars in heaven, then he can also take care of us. And in this case, he can take care of the Jews and the people in Denmark. Mama sat down and listened. Gradually, they each began to relax. Anna-Marie could see the old man across the room, moving his lips as Peter read. He knew that psalm by heart. Anna-Marie didn't. The words were unfamiliar to her, and she tried to listen, tried to understand, tried to forget the war and the Nazis, tried not to cry, tried to be brave. The night breeze moved the dark curtains at the open windows. Outside, she knew the sky was speckled with stars. How could anyone number them one by one, as the psalm said? There were too many. The sky was too big. Ellen had said that her mother was frightened of the ocean, that it was too cold and too big. The sky was too, thought Anna-Marie. The whole world was too cold, too big, too cruel. Peter read on in his firm voice, though it was clear he was tired. The long minutes passed. They seemed hours. Finally, still reading, he moved quietly to the window. He closed the Bible and listened to the quiet night. Then he looked around the room. Now, he said, it is time. First, he closed the windows. Then he went to the casket and opened the lid. So when we begin chapter 11, we're going to find out what is in that casket and time for what. Chapter 11, Will We See You Again Soon, Peter? So just by that title, we know that Peter's going to go away and leave them. Anna-Marie blinked across the dark room. She saw Ellen, too, peering into the narrow wooden box in surprise. There was no one in the casket at all. Instead, it seemed to be stuffed with folded blankets and articles of clothing. Peter began to lift the things out and distribute them to the silent people in the room. He handed heavy coats to the man and wife, and another to the old man with a beard. It will be cold, he murmured. Put them on. He found a thick sweater for Mrs. Rosen and a woolen jacket for Ellen's father. After a moment of rummaging through the folded things, he found a smaller winter jacket and handed it to Ellen. Anna-Marie watched as Ellen took the jacket in her arms and looked at it. It was patched and worn. It was true that there had been few new clothes for anyone during the recent years, but still, Ellen's mother had always arranged to make clothes for her daughter, often using old things that she was able to take apart and refashion in a way that made them seem brand new. Never had Ellen worn anything so shabby and old. But she put it on, pulled it around her, and buttoned the mismatched buttons. Peter, his arms full of the odd pieces of clothing, looked toward the silent couple with the infant. I'm sorry, he said to them. There's nothing for the baby. Oh, I'll find something, Mother said quickly. The baby must be warm. She left the room and was back in a moment with Kirsty's thick red sweater. Here, she said softly to the mother, it will be much too big, but that will make it even warmer for him. The woman spoke for the first time. Her, she whispered, she's a girl. Her name is Rachel. Mama smiled and helped her direct the sleeping baby's arms into the sleeves of the sweater. Together they buttoned the heart-shaped buttons. How Kirsty loved that sweater with its heart buttons until the tiny child was completely encased in the warm red wool. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. Peter reached into his pocket and took something out. He went to the parents and leaned down toward the baby. He opened the lid of the small bottle in his hand. How much does she weigh? Peter asked. Well, she was 7 pounds when she was born, the young woman replied. She's gained a little, but not very much. Maybe she weighs 8 pounds now. No more. Well, a few drops will be enough then. It has no taste. She won't even notice. The mother tightened her arms around the baby and looked up at Peter, pleading. Please, no, she said. She always sleeps at night. Please, she doesn't need it. I promise she won't cry. Peter's voice was firm. We can't take a chance, he said. He inserted the dropper of the bottle into the baby's tiny mouth and squeezed a few drops of liquid onto her tongue. The baby yawned and swallowed. The mother closed her eyes. Her husband gripped her shoulder. What do you think those drops are going to do to the baby? They don't want the baby to cry. So it's going to be something that's going to keep her from crying. Next, Peter removed the folded blanket from the coffin one by one and handed them around. Carry these with you, he said. You will need them later for warmth. Anna Marie's mother moved around the room and gave each person a small package of food. The cheese and bread and apples that Anna Marie had helped to prepare in the kitchen hours before. Finally, Peter took a paper-wrapped packet from the inside of his own jacket. He looked around the room at the assembled people now dressed in bulky winter clothing, and then motioned to Mr. Rosen, who followed him to the hall. Anna Marie could overhear their conversation. Mr. Rosen, Peter said, I must get this to Henrik, but I might not see him. I am going to take the others only to the harbor. They will go to the boat alone. I want you to deliver this without fail. It is of great importance. There was a moment of silence in the hall, and Anna Marie knew that Peter must be giving the packet to Mr. Rosen. Anna Marie could see it protruding from Mr. Rosen's pocket when he returned to the room and sat down again. She could see, too, that Mr. Rosen had a puzzled look. He didn't know what the packet contained, and he hadn't asked. It was one more time, Anna Marie realized, when they protected one another by not telling. If Mr. Rosen knew, he might be frightened. If Mr. Rosen knew, he might be in danger. So he hadn't asked, and Peter hadn't explained. Now, Peter said, as he looked at his watch, I will lead the first group. You and you and you. He gestured to the old man and to the young people with the baby. Inge, he said. Anna Marie realized that it was the first time she had heard Peter Nielsen call her mother by her first name before. It had always been Mrs. Johansson, or in the old days, during the merriment and excitement of his engagement to Lisa, it had been occasionally Mama. Now it was Inge. It was as if he had moved beyond his own youth and taken his place in the world of adults. Her mother nodded and waited for his instructions. You wait 20 minutes, then bring the Rosens. Don't come sooner. We must be separate on the path, so there is less chance of being seen. Mrs. Johansson nodded again. Come directly back to the house after you've seen the Rosens safely to Henrik. Stay in the shadows and on the back path. You know that, of course. By the time you get the Rosens to the boat, Peter went on, I will be gone. As soon as I deliver my group, I must move on. There is other work to be done tonight. He turned to Anna Marie, so I will say goodbye to you now. Anna Marie went to him and gave him a hug. But we will see you again soon, she asked. I hope so, Peter said. Very soon. Don't grow much more. You will be taller than I am, little long legs. Anna Marie smiled, but Peter's comment was no longer the light-hearted fun of the past. It was only a brief grasp at what had gone. Peter kissed Mama wordlessly, then he wished the Rosens Godspeed, and he led the others through the door. Mama, Anna Marie, and the Rosens sat in silence. There was a slight commotion outside the door, and Mama went quickly to look out. In a moment she was back. It's all right, she said in response to their looks. The old man stumbled, but Peter helped him up. He didn't seem to be hurt. Maybe just his pride, she added, smiling a bit. It was an odd word, pride. Anna Marie looked at the Rosens sitting there, wearing their misshapen, ill-fitting clothing, holding ragged blankets folded in their arms, their faces drawn and tired. She remembered the earlier, happier times. Mrs. Rosen, her hair neatly combed and covered, lighting the Sabbath candles, saying the ancient prayer. And Mr. Rosen, sitting in the big chair in their living room, studying his thick books, correcting papers, adjusting his glasses, looking up now and then to complain good-naturedly about the lack of decent light. She remembered Ellen in the school play, moving confidently across the stage, her gesture sure, her voice clear. All of these things, those sources of pride, the candlesticks, the books, the daydreams of theater, had been left behind in Copenhagen. They had nothing with them now. There was only the clothing of unknown people for warmth, the food from Henrik's farm for survival, and the dark path ahead, through the woods, to freedom. Anna Marie realized, though she had not really been told, that Uncle Henrik was going to take them in his boat across the sea to Sweden. She knew how frightened Mrs. Rosen was of the sea, its width, its depth, its cold. She knew how frightened Ellen was of the soldiers with their guns and boots, who were certainly looking for them. And she knew how frightened they all must be of the future. But their shoulders were as straight as they had been in the past, in the classroom, on the stage, at the Sabbath table. So there were other sources too of pride. They had not left everything behind. So what do you think has helped them not be so afraid? Even though they don't like cold and they don't like water and they don't like Nazi soldiers, I think it's their belief in God and trusting that there are always helpers that will be there to help them, like Peter, like Henrik, like Anna Marie and her mother. What do you think? Okay, that's the end of chapter 11. And next we'll be reading chapter 12, Where Was Mama? See you later. Bye-bye.